and I wish to welcome you to our Era of Accelerated Change webinar series hosted by Stellenbosch Business School Executive Development. My name is Kevin Henderson, and I am a proposal and design specialist here at SBS Ed. And today, I'm delighted to have you with us for this the session on how solid is your strategy really. Our leading conversationalist this afternoon will be Melvi, Todd, an innovation architect and a strategist who specializes in building future-proof systems. She is joined by two exceptional speakers, Nanda Padayachee, who's an expert in digital transformation and associate director at BCG, and also by Hlonela Mtoba, who's a leader in talent acquisition across Africa at Standard Bank. For this afternoon session, we encourage you to share your questions within the chat. My colleagues have posted the LinkedIn profiles of our speakers and our leading conversationalists this afternoon. So please post your questions, share your thoughts in particular, as we would like to keep this a nice interactive session. We'll wrap up the session this afternoon with a Q&A, and so please do join us for the discussion afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, your hands in mine as I ask you to join in welcoming our conversationalists, like I've said, Melvi, Todd, Padayachee, and Hlonela Mtoba. Melvi, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon again to everyone, all of our excited webinar attendees. So it's a pleasure to have you here for the final installment of our Era of Accelerated Change webinar. And today's topic, how solid is your strategy really? So it's pertinent to first ask, well, what is strategy? Well, strategy constitutes choices. Who is our customer? What are we going to give them in terms of value proposition? How will we reach them? Through what channels? And so then the question is also, well, but why are we as business leaders so concerned with strategy? I think it simply is because strategy helps us make more informed decisions in a world where resources are limited and the future is uncertain. Of course, formal strategic planning doesn't go without critique. Some of the critique being the fact that with all the focus on detailed analysis and formal procedures, we often miss the creative and dynamic and emergent aspects of true strategic thinking, which is, of course, essential in fast-paced and quickly changing environments, which is where we find ourselves right now. So according to Accenture's Pulse of Change report for 2024, which looks at change measured across a number of different factors, 6 in fact: technology, talent, economic, geopolitical, climate, and consumer and social. And according to this report, they indicate that the rate of change has been increasing an astounding 183% over the last 4 years, since 2019. The report obviously is retrospective, ending in 2023. And the rate of change just in the last year measured up until the end of 2023 being 33%. So if you've been feeling blown away by the rate of change, you're not alone and you're not imagining it. The report also looks at not only Accenture's analytical data, but also looks at the perceptions of over 3,400 C-suite leaders and seeks to find their perceptions around the rate of change in the 6 pillars I mentioned just now. So overall, C-suite consider the change to be positive. It's an opportunity overall for businesses. However, about 52% of them say, well, we don't really think we're fully prepared for this change. Of the 6 factors, what is leading the change, or where is the change the most experienced the most prolifically? Technology, of course. And so if we look at on the right-hand side over there, C-suite perceptions, technology, and on the left-hand side, marrying that with Accenture's analysis. So we see some synergy in an agreement around technology certainly is the leading cause of change in businesses. And to break that down in a little bit more detail, So overall, for this pillar specifically, we've seen an 88% increase in technology disruption in the year 2023, as per the indicators in the report. And then looking at the C-suite again, they're saying, well, about 47% of them say, well, even though this change is happening, we don't really feel prepared for it. And only 27% of them saying that we're ready to scale generative AI, which of course is one of the leading factors causing to this experience around disruption and particularly changes in technology. Then out of the C-suite again, 44% saying they think it'll take them at least 6 months, if not more, to gain an advantage from generative AI specifically. But 76% of them see it more of an opportunity than a threat. And then lastly, whilst there are investments in technology, most of them are approaching this with caution. And in fact, 72% approaching with caution, mostly around those concerns about responsible use. And we see a lot being talked about ethics around AI, that we should have policies, et cetera, So that was our number one cause of business change. Number two, talent. And here we see a little bit of discrepancy between the Accenture analysis on the left-hand side and C-suite perceptions around the cause of business change being around talent. So little bit of a challenge here in terms of there's a perception gap. C-suite is not perceiving talent to be as much of a reason for driving change in business as the data is in fact telling us. And when we're talking about talent, things like skills shortages are being mentioned. So I'm sure many of you listening to this today have a very recent experience. I was chatting to someone just last week around how they were really struggling to fill a particular role. And then lack of employee engagement as another measure, not the only two, but two of the ones I thought I'd mention today. And I think employee engagement, again, is something that every time we see the Gallup survey coming out, we just see those numbers plummeting, and many factors contributing to that. But we know so critical to business, and yet we're struggling to get it right. So what should we conclude from this? Well, certainly there is a critical need for businesses to actually prioritize investing in their people whilst also harnessing the power of new technologies like generative AI. So the question is, well, what should we do? And to quote Peter Drucker, the greatest danger in such times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. And so with that, I think that is the intention of today's webinar, to share updates from influential business people who can speak to the topics of technology and talent, especially so that none of us might find ourselves acting with yesterday's logic. So to kick off our discussion, I am going to post the first question in Nanda's direction. And that is to ask you, well, Nanda, you're working at the intersection of technology, strategy, and data with large-scale digital transformations. So the question is, how have you used data or AI to future-proof your strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Melvi. It's a great opportunity to engage with everyone here today. And I think on such a critical topic, when we work with our clients locally across the continent and around the world, this topic of strategy is at the heart of many conversations, because it's to the point you outlined earlier. What do we spend time and energy on, and is that the most valuable use of our scarce resources? And I think what we're seeing, and what I've personally experienced, is that we've started to change, and clients and organizations have started to change the way they think about creating value from data. And I think it's a factor of, as we experience increased digitization, as we try and bring digital more and more into how we create new ways of engaging with clients, how we create new products and services, new ways of work, new technology capabilities. All of that needs to come together with technology. But what data brings is almost the intelligence as to, well, how do we actually connect these things together in a meaningful way to create value and deliver our strategy in a very impactful way? And so, almost like over the last, if we contrast over the last 10 years to more recently, data was originally seen as almost a byproduct of what we do with technology. And now data has become the fuel that's driving this differentiation, this engagement, this interaction, this intelligence that we're trying to bring into the different facets of experiences with clients. And what that's also meant is that organizations have always put a premium on how they handle data, how they work with data. But now we've moved from just collecting data, and everybody's got a data lake today. Everybody's got a data science team today. It really becomes, how do we create value from this data? And I think it's also why there's been so much excitement around Gen AI, and you've indicated that is, one of the big factors of disruption in the last year is really the excitement around, well, here's actually another dynamic way to create value from this data that we have, that our clients have entrusted with us, to serve them in a more meaningful, in a more impactful manner. And so that's what we're starting to see come to the fore more and more. But it's, it's not without its challenges. Working with data is not easy. There's a high premium in terms of privacy, security, governance, responsibility. But we've seen that come to the forefront in a very dynamic way. And the last point I'll share, just to to end on this particular question, is that if you look at how technology's evolved over the last 50 years, we've almost gone from green screens to Gen AI in almost the blink of an eye. But what we're starting to see more and more is that organizations, that the more digital you are as an organization, the more dependent you are on making technology, data, digital a core part of your strategy, because that now becomes either the core enabler or a limiting factor in your ability to realize your strategy. And that's what we're starting to see more and more of.
Amazing. Thanks, Nanda. I love that data as fuel. I think indeed that really captures it. And with the more we go into this world of data and data being fuel, needing that to become central to our strategies. And of course, I guess driving behind the data, we also need the humans. So, Hloni, I would like to also pose the question to you, seeing as you work extensively in talent acquisition. Can you share some thoughts on how organizations should actually rethink their strategies, specifically around talent, to remain resilient during this period of rapid change, which we know is only going to continue accelerating?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So I think, what we have really touched on, what has dominated the conversation we've been having today, is technology, right? And that's exactly where I'm going to start. Now, obviously, adopting AI and focusing on future-ready skills, right, is very imperative when it comes to, reshaping or redesigning, the strategy of an organization, or yeah, your organization, if you have your own one as a person. Now, the thing is, approximately 65% of jobs, right, that exist today did not exist 10 years ago. And that is only going to get worse. That's more than half of the jobs that exist today that did not exist 10 years ago. The thought of that is obviously, it's crazy. And it's only going to get worse, right? There's going to be new jobs that come about, and AI is going to, as much as people, have a fear that, AI is going to take away jobs, it's also going to create jobs as much as it's going to take away jobs. Instead, what it's going to do, which is technology. So when I speak about technology, when I speak about AI, I'm really just referring to technology as a whole, right? It's going to cut out certain elements and certain jobs, but it's also going to it's going to open up an opportunity, to create new jobs, which is what we've seen in the last 10 years with the existence of technology. So obviously, the changes in industry demands and an evolving workplace are obviously due to this, right? Now, some of the key factors to consider when aiming to remain resilient in this world that we live in, that is, dominated by technology. Strong employer branding is absolutely one of them. No matter how much technology you may have, it still requires, a human touch. When you have to innovate around, your employer branding, right? Employer branding is very important. It's very crucial, to have as part of your strategy. It's your brand. It's what people see out there, as as people who are part of talent acquisition and talent management, when we search for talent, one thing we've realized is the reputation of your organization, you know, it says a lot about whether, you know, people are going to have an interest in joining your organization as employees or not. And that's really in the control of the organization, right? So it should form part of your strategy to put yourself out there and brand yourself, you know, in a very attractive way to people. All right. And the other one is data-driven decision making, right? Which speaks to Nanda's points as well. You know, having those information systems in place, you know, that help you, you know, manage your data and keep the information in place, and you know, process the data into information, if I should put it like that, that helps you make the decisions. So it's very important to make sure that you've got your technology, you know, in place as well, right? Diversity and inclusion is another one. People nowadays, a huge population of people, you know, skilled individuals, you know, are very big on work-life balance, the balance between, you know, their personal lives and work, right? I mean, we've seen it, you know, ever since COVID up until today, where people have been working from home. Some have been working hybrid models, but what we have noticed and what we have seen is that people are actually not keen to go back to the office full time. People want to remain, you know, in the hybrid model. Some want to remain fully remote, right? And that speaks to work-life balance, right? Which ties in very perfectly to diversity and inclusion, right? As much as a lot of people would think that diversity and inclusion solely speaks to, you know, EE targets, EE gaps, you know, balancing out, you know, your disability employees, etc. It also involves you know, the work-life balance as well, which speaks to the last point, which I'll come to, which is resilience and well-being as well. But before I get there, another point that I'd like to mention is an agile workforce planning. So, you know, you have to ensure that as part of your strategy must not be excessive, but it must also not, you know, overwork the people that you will be hiring. So you need to find a balance between the amount of work that needs to be done and the amount of people that needs to do that work without having to overwork by understaffing or, you know, overstaffing, you know. So it's very important to have an agile workforce plan in place. And then again, continuous learning and development. So developing your people is a very critical part of retention, of retaining them, right? You have to keep your people constantly engaged and constantly, you know, learning new things, because people get bored. I mean, if you do the same thing for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, eventually, you know, you get bored and you want to look for something else. So you have to keep your people engaged and keep them learning and developing their skills, right? So that would speak to the learning and development aspect of business. And then, like I said, resilience and well-being. So again, well-being, ensuring that, I mean, there's a huge, you know, focus on mental health nowadays, right? It's a talk that happens everywhere. You know, a lot of organizations are, you know, are investing in wellness when it comes to the employees. So that's also something that, you know, needs to be factored into any organization's strategy. Because all of these factors, all of these points that I just made contribute to retention. They contribute to the attraction of talent and the retention of talent. You get all of these right, you attract the people, but you don't only attract them, you get to retain them as well, which I think is you know, the sweet spot when it comes to managing or talent management, if I should put it like that. Yeah.
Thanks, Hlonela. I really love what you said there in terms of the onus is also on us as business owners, business leaders, to also build that reputation and create that environment that attracts the talent.
Yeah.
We can't just sit there and complain and say, oh, you know, there's no talent. We also need to acknowledge our role as businesses in society and also do our bit to build that talent that we need. And maybe my next question is for both of you, and maybe Nanda, you, and then Hlonela can weigh in on that. I think, you know, what I'm hearing is we need to maintain this focus between cutting edge innovation, a lot of which is technologically focused now more and more so, And then there's also the people that are implementing and driving that. So Nanda, like how do you strike a balance between those two? Like how do you, you know, I don't want to say prioritize the one, but rather maybe balance and incentivize. We just heard Hlonela, you can weigh in on that just now in terms of the agility of people with what's required there to stay up to date.
I'd make two comments in that regard. I think one is that, especially when we're talking about something groundbreaking and new, it always starts at the edges. And so I think, sometimes what we experience is something brand new that emerges, and we think tomorrow this is going to change every aspect of how we show up in an organization, our ways of work, etc. But really, it takes time to become fully absorbed within the organization. And I think this is a key aspect of strategy, that what is that rate of change and that rate of absorption that says, there's something new, this is going to become important and going to be critical to how we deliver our strategy. But you never start with that at the core of your strategy. It starts on the edges and you make that more and more mainstream over time. The faster you're able to do that, that's a distinct source of competitive advantage. And I think that's key. But you never, and even with something like Gen AI as an example, and I'll use that because we're all talking about it right now. We'd experience that almost in a couple of different dimensions. You'd have many organizations giving teams access to things like Copilot or ChatGPT, just to get to familiar with what that looks like. And that's one level of engagement in an organization. There's equally then product teams that are considering, well, how can I build? How can I use this capability? And then you've got people at the core who are actually engineering this type of capability, but it's almost an inverted pyramid where we've got many people exposed to a basic level of capability, and then we're starting to mature and make that more concentrated, in certain aspects of the organization. And it's exactly that with any new capability, any new innovation, any new technology. And I think part of what sometimes causes this change fatigue, and like I always, it's 69 days left until the start of 2025. It feels like it was just 2020, 2 years ago. But as we've described, the rate of change is just so high. But I think we also sometimes do a disservice because we expect, or we create the perception that this change is going to be universal and experienced equally throughout an entire organization, and that's really not the case. The second point I wanted to make, and I'll try and make that more succinctly than my first point, is that what we've seen in the work we do with clients is that we've got almost a mantra, a ratio around what we call 20-70-10. So across any type of digital transformation, 10% of the effort is around the data, the algorithms. 20% is actually around the systems, the technology, the architecture. And 70% of that effort is actually around the people. How do you adapt to that? What changes? What stays the same? How do we navigate that? How do we change our way of work? How do we change our processes? How do we change our client experiences? And so I wanted to just offer that as maybe a segue into Hlonela's response to this question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before he jumps in, I also just wanted to add there, because what I was hearing is you we're talking about aspects of like a dual transformation, and especially with the periphery, experimenting, etc. And I think that sometimes requires a different, I don't want to say skill set, but also sometimes attitude. So maybe also working into this, Hlonela, sorry to make your life more difficult, but I think there's also a balance of knowledge and attitude, because like we almost can't always stay up to date with the knowledge. We're learning it on the fly, but we need to have people that are willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think balancing the scale between knowledge and attitude, especially for long-term success, requires a strategic approach, right? Now, the approach has to entail a holistic hiring practice as one of the first facts, right? And ongoing training as well. So all of this would basically encourage a growth mindset in order to cultivate an environment where learning from failures is embraced, right? Now, also another point that I'd like to make here is feedback loops are also, an important factor as they regularly, solicit feedback from employees about the balance knowledge and attitude in the workplace, right? So what I've also seen is, on the point of knowledge and attitude. So those are very two, you know, separate things, right? Which we are trying to now find a balance in. And as I've just mentioned, some of the points that will help, in managing that balance. But I think what is very crucial to note here is, attitude. I just want to touch on that because knowledge, I think we understand it. We understand that, okay, it's more or less, having, or having a wealth of knowledge when it comes to whatever industry you are part of, whatever role that you have to play in a particular organization. But the thing is about attitude now is, it's a very valuable strategy, right? Now, I think maybe let me touch on, when we hire for attitude, right? For example, it's a very valuable strategy, hiring for attitude, especially in today's dynamic work environment. I mean, when we consider factors such as culture fit, adaptability, potential for growth, retention, the attitude of employees tells you all you need to know about where they stand when it comes to those factors, right? So an attitude that reflects what I have just mentioned is the ideal attitude that we would ideally want to be part of our organization, whether we're talking about strategic roles or operational roles, right? Because obviously the higher you climb up an organization, the more strategic the role becomes. And technically, the lower, the more operational. But when it comes to attitude, it doesn't matter where you sit, all of whether you strategic or operational, the attitude, yeah, it's a reflection, that needs the attributes that I basically just mentioned.
I love that you mentioned learning from failure and also like adopting that into your business environment, because I think, we talk about experimentation and then, often sometimes leaders, we it's not that easy to encourage experimentation when you aren't guaranteed a good result, and you're going to have to be, accountable to answering on, when things didn't work well. But I think it's really, again, a mind shift around changing from experimenting, yes, a yes/no answer, it was a failure or not. Rather, it's always a success if we can capitalize on those learnings and build on them for something in the future. And I think that's the reality. I think we were kidding ourselves if we ever thought we lived in a world where we had much certainty. But if any of us had that misperception, I think it's flown out the window a long time ago. And the reality is, anything that we end up doing, we know there's a fairly good chance of failure. And if that's not the case, then you're probably just doing something incremental in terms of your strategy and nothing, game changing. So Nanda, and again, it's something I'd maybe like to ask both of you, but I think, Nanda, I'd love to specifically, hone in on this, when things don't go according to plan. Maybe you can share something around a time when you had to make a strategic shift because, things, the dice simply weren't landing as planned. And, was there, as a result of that, learnings that you then, capitalized on going forward?
Yeah, it's the point around, the lessons you learn from your failures are the hardest lessons that you learn, but equally the most valuable. And when you hear that the first time, it's like, it sounds very cliched and glib. When you actually experience that firsthand and you see how that shapes your outlook, it creates a very different perspective. And I'll mention a couple of examples, but maybe one to start with was, I'm very much a technologist at heart, and so I used to hold very strongly the belief that purely through technology, if we just had this system, if we just had this platform, if we just had this technology, like we could make all these problems go away. And I learned very quickly, and in a couple of different instances, that actually it's an important ingredient for success, but it's not the singular determinant factor. And it really becomes all the factors that you associate around that change, which is, what is people's skill set and their ability to absorb that change? What does it mean for clients? They have their own behaviors, their own preferences, their own needs. How does this connect to that? And does it connect with that? And do they gravitate towards that? What is the cycle associated with the rate of change? You may have an amazing proposition. We do a lot of work in the banking industry, as an example, and all of us probably on this call, our default method of accessing our banking services is through our app. If I had to share with you that across South Africa, the most frequently used channel for clients to engage with banking services is USSD. Like, it blows your mind. Like, but we've had apps for forever. But that's the rate of change. That's the inequality in our market. That's the nature structurally of what we're dealing with. And so I think, so reflecting on your question, I think, that's those are some of the things that come to mind that says, one, there's an uncertainty and ambiguity around strategy by default, but also in the market and how we execute. I think we also treat strategy in a very binary or singular context, that it's this or that. And I think what we've started to see become more and more accepted is that strategy becomes contingent on a host of contextual factors. And I may have a strategy for clients who are predominantly online, clients who are predominantly offline, clients who transition between that, clients in a particular economic context. But how you navigate through that becomes, particularly important. I think, the other thing that's always at play, especially in large organizations, is that there's competing priorities. And there's never full certainty that a journey that you embark on, you'll get to see all the way through to completion. And I think, one of the things organizations really struggle with is how do we hold this tension between what we need to do for today and what we need to do for tomorrow. And sometimes we over-index on what we need to do for tomorrow, and we've got to recalibrate. And sometimes it's the other way around, that we are being too conservative, too incremental, and we've got to be a little bit more bold, a little bit more out there. But yeah, those are some of the practical experiences and insights that I've personally experienced and we've seen firsthand with many different organizations.
Thanks, Nanda. Yeah, Hlonela, I just want to restate the question again and thinking again around specifically talent and your area. I mean, and we talked about, this pace of change, the ability to adapt, holding these seemingly paradoxical ideas sometimes in terms of what we need to do. Is it, what prioritizing today or tomorrow, as Nanda says. So, do you maybe have a story or analogy, without divulging any confidential information, of course, around a time when, having the right talent aboard, helped your company overcoming, a significant challenge?
There isn't one specific one that stands out, right? But I know that with my previous organization, where I was before here, where I am now. So the previous organization, there was an exercise that they were conducting, right? And this exercise basically almost posed a threat to the stability of the employees' jobs, right? However, there were preventative measures that were put in place prior to that in order to make sure that we don't get there. So in other words, the exco, like the C-suite individuals of the particular organization, did alert the employees that in order for us to avoid getting to that point, we need to move in this direction. Otherwise, if we continue moving, at this pace in this direction, this is where we'll find ourselves in the unfortunate event of, having to let people go. Now, obviously, that requires a specific type of people in order to be able to, relay the message and have everybody change direction and move in a different direction. Definitely, speaks to the type of individual that we had at that point in time as part of the organization. Now, people are a vital part of any organization, right? They are the blood vessel of the organization, and there are several key functions that people in driving resilience in a business. Some of these functions, play, or these are the functions basically that are technically, important or imperative, is adaptability being one of them, right? Collaboration as well. As I mentioned, when we were instructed at the time that, we need to change operation, if I should put it like that, right? So that we don't get to a certain point of losing jobs, etc. It required a lot of collaborating, right? And an attitude as well of, not not giving up, if I should put it that way, right? Resilience, engagement as well being one of them. I think, as I mentioned, adaptability as well, um, and skills development. Again, we go back to skills development. That was another one, because when you have to almost pivot around a certain situation, you learn new things, and you need change management as a part of that, as well, to be able to keep everybody calm while teaching everybody how to maneuver and navigate around a particular challenge. So definitely skills development, which in this particular instance would be supported by change management. Transparent communication. I mean, had the execs or the C-suite individuals of that particular organization not have communicated, what they communicated, we would have probably found ourselves in an unfortunate situation. But because there was transparent communication, we were able to avoid, the unfortunate event, or the unfortunate possibility of, having people lose their jobs. Now, I think my last point would be resilient leadership. Um, we can speak about attracting talent, attracting the right talent, but I think what really steers amongst the actual talent that we attract to the organization, right? What really steers an organization in the right direction and to success is the leadership, right? Now I know the leadership obviously does play part of the talent as well, but usually the leadership is what hires the talent, right? Now the leadership is a completely fundamental. It's the heart of an organization. If it fails, the entire organization is dead, right? So a resilient leadership, a leadership that is flexible and is able to adapt to change, and move with the times as well. I would say that those are the key factors, really, that would help in pivoting around difficult times and challenging times. Yeah.
Thanks, Hlonela. I really loved what you say, and I think this is maybe almost to transition us to the Q&A, because I just see lots of questions popping up on the chat. But I love this quote from Yuval Noah Harari, a historian, and he says, "In order to keep up with the world of 2050, you will need not merely to invent new ideas and products. You will, above all, need to reinvent yourself again and again." And I think that applies to us individually, whether we be, workers or leaders in the organization, I think, and then as a result, the organization as well. And I think, as you mentioned about resilient leaders with the ability to unleash the power of people's creativity, in order to keep up. Because if we try and think that we are going to be able to imagine everything and prepare for everything, we'll be misleading ourselves, right? And Nanda as well, I mean, you've made this point as well in terms of, balancing these changes and staying up to date. And I think to a large portion, people are the center of this and enabled through technology. And I think the future is bright, as long as we can, acknowledge these requirements of ourselves as humans, that, we also need to lead the change if we also want to see the change in our organizations. Jane, thank you. Thank you, Nanda. Thank you, Hlonela. I think those were some amazing insights, and I would love to switch us to the chat now, because I saw tons of questions coming in. So I'm going to hand over to Jane just to field those for me, and then we have a look at answering them.
Thanks, Melvin. Thanks, everyone. We do have a couple of questions coming through to me and on the chat in general. So I'll start from the top. We have a question from Martin here. So, and he asks, considering the undeniably mushrooming AI-infused jobs, however, not entirely absorbing the unemployed masses, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, to what extent is higher/technical education and the labor market accelerating to close this skills gap?
That's a very, very, very good question. I feel like some of that might also be directed via me as someone that's working in the education space as well. And I think the reality is that it's probably, things that we need to work with and collaborate, like is happening, not just the educational institutions, but also partnering with industry, I think, because, we can only move so fast, and there is only so much flexibility within these institutional paradigms. So what I think we are doing already, but perhaps there's always room to do more of, is collaborating with industry and the people who are at the coalface of all of these changes and seeing like, how do we need to adapt? What do we need to incorporate? How is there more thinking that we can bring in from these areas? That would just briefly be my thoughts, but I think Nanda and Hlonela, I think you should weigh in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think a collaboration between you know, the particular organizations or certain organizations collaborating with educational institutions will definitely, you know, help or assist to alleviate, you know, the skills gap or the skills shortage. Because really, you know, it's not that there's a lack of jobs. You know, I mean, you know, I do know that that's probably a controversial statement to make, but you know, studies have actually found that, you know, there's a skills mismatch rather. I mean, you go onto your PNets, your career junctions, there's jobs there every single day. You know, you go onto LinkedIn, there's jobs every single day. The only problem is that, you know, the skills that are required for those particular jobs, you know, are not out there, meaning that, you know, wherever it's going wrong, whether it's within the education system or somewhere, wherever it's going wrong, there's a mismatch, you know, when it comes to the reality of things and what people think is the actual reality of things.
Nanda, would you like to weigh in as well?
Maybe the only point I'd make is I think there's a great recognition in our country around the need for stronger basic, secondary, and tertiary education and how we create this. You know, we speak around the just energy transition, but equally the skills associated with the type of transition that we need and the type of jobs that we need to create. I think there's a great recognition that even for the skills profile that we have now, as you know, as has been cited, that there's still so much potential for us as a country. And so I don't think we need to feel pessimistic in any way that we're not sitting at the heart of Silicon Valley, we're not sitting in Shanghai, we don't have access to all of these things. I think even just, you know, we don't, even though we may not necessarily be at the coalface of inventing capabilities right now, being the best adopters of these capabilities can be a massive competitive advantage for us as a country.
Absolutely. I like what you said there because I do perceive us to be fairly good on the adoption side. I mean, I recently had a friend from Austria visiting and she was quite surprised. I mean, nothing on Austria particularly, but quite surprised to see how, you know, digital payments is just everywhere. I have so many cashless facilities, you know, our bills already have whatever QR codes, all these things integrated. There's so many places we've adopted so much technology that's actually ahead of many areas around the world. So I love what you said there about adoption. And I think we're not doing a terrible job in that regard.
Thanks,
Jane,
colleague.
next question.
Yes. So we have a question here from Wendy. She, and I think this is directed at Hlonela. I recall that you mentioned attitude. So Wendy asks how best employees can objectively test for attitude as part of the talent acquisition process. She agrees that attitude does play a crucial role in the employee-employer journey. And that's from Wendy. Thank you.
Okay. Can you please just repeat the question for me so that I can just understand it well?
Sure. It's she's really asking around how employees objectively test for attitude as part of the talent acquisition process.
Oh, employers. Oh, okay.
Yes.
So, okay. So, um, it's there's a variety of processes in place, right, that test for attitude. There's obviously, you know, the first step being the interview process. Now that, you know, that's up to the discretion of the panel members, right? However, you know, there's processes that fall or that come in after that, such as psychometrics, you know, such as case studies, and really what those test, you know, is exactly that. It's exactly, you know, the attitude. There's elements of the psychometrics which, you know, can test, you know, other cognitive abilities, but attitude definitely being one of them. Because we get to assess, you know, your leadership capabilities, you know, whether you're a person who's, you know, at a leadership level in terms of, you know, how you conduct yourself and the type of decisions that you'll make. So I think to answer your question, you know, we test for attitude, I think throughout the entire process, not just, you know, at interview and then the rest, you know, is I think every single step, you know, that you partake in as a person who's going through, you know, the process. Your attitude is being tested at every step of the way.
Thank you. I'm going to race through the questions. I really want to get through all of them, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to go straight to the next question, Melvi.
Thanks, Jen.
So I have a question here from Una. She would like to know is what are the ways that we could consistently keep the organization balancing the thinking for today and for tomorrow? So how do we not get tomorrow swallowed up by today?
Yeah, I can.
Nanda, I would let you, would you like to weigh in on that one first?
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at that. I think it's one of the hardest things to do, and it requires continuous attention. What we observe is organizations who do this really well have a way of, in the way they execute today, they seed the capabilities that they need to be successful into the future. So you try and minimize the amount of trade-off that you need to do. So I'd answer one level organizationally in that context. I'd say the other is personally. Look at your calendar. Look at, all the double book meetings that you have and how you're spending your time, and how much of your time personally is spent on today, how much of that is spent on tomorrow. And I think even at a personal level, starting to become more conscious and attuned on that starts to make a difference, in an organizational setting.
Yeah, I think I maybe would want to just add to that and say my experience as well has been, you have to make a concerted effort. If we look at sort of something like the 3 horizons model, I typically find that's not necessarily used correctly either. Year 1, year 2, year 3. It's not really, it's supposed to be, short term, medium term, long term. And what we find is that the medium and the longer term is often neglected because it's the firefighting of today, and quite honestly, also sometimes the instant gratification of solving today's problems and like being the hero and whatever that can consume you. So to Nanda's point, I think there's discipline involved in terms of, if you say it's a priority, then you need to vote it's a priority with your time and what you put in your calendar, and assemble a team. And I think also that that directive, if I can put it that way, needs to come from top leadership. Top leadership can't say, we want to prioritize tomorrow and then not give the team the time and the resources to start looking at that.
Thank you, Melvi. I'm going to get straight into the next one because this one that I actually wanted to ask myself. So I'm glad it has been asked by somebody else in the audience. So are 3 to 5 year strategies still relevant, particularly given this pace and acceleration of change?
Good question.
Nanda, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I think I think we need to make the distinction between the strategy, which establishes the direction, and then the tactics, which is what we use to achieve and progress towards that. And I think certainly strategy within a 3 to 5 year period is still very relevant. Where we need to have that flexibility is the tactics and how we get there is going to change. And I think that's where there's that adaptability that's required, because, there's certain, it's very rare for there to be such extenuating factors, either in the macro condition or within an organization, that says our strategy is completely redundant. We got this completely wrong. That may happen, but that's very much an outlier. It's very much around that adaptability of the tactics. And I think this is sometimes where, even as, the individuals who experience change or lead change, we sometimes experience that discomfort because we get attached to the details. The principles are staying the same. The direction is staying the same. The destination, the end state is the same. The path that we're taking to get there, we have to have some flexibility around.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in, but I'd first like to give Hlonela a chance to also add from a talent perspective. Also, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, it's still very much relevant to have like a 3 to 5 year plan, right? Because you have to have goals, right? As an organization, whether it's short term or long term goals. Hi, am I still audible? I think everyone. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I think my network cut there for a moment. So I was saying it's still very much relevant, right, to have a 3 to 5 year goal, right? Because you need to have goals as an organization. You need to know where the organization needs to be within the next 5 years, whether it's from a revenue perspective, you know, whether it's from a branding perspective, you know, even from a talent perspective, right? And as per Nanda's point, how we get there definitely needs to be flexible. You know, we need to set ourselves up in a way that, you know, we can take certain punches of change, you know, as time goes, right? But definitely having a 5-year plan, you know, even when it comes to talent, you know, workforce planning is actually exactly that. You know, we need to know, you know, what do we need as a head count in order to reach a certain, you know, revenue by 2027, for example, right? So absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I just want to add to that, because I think we're all in agreement here, is that, you know, in addition to that, we are as society realizing the problems we've caused for ourselves by having a short-term view. And you know, there's been a period where we've said, okay, you can't plan long-term anymore because of all the change. But I think there also needs to be a distinction between setting goals. I think there's huge value in setting goals for 10, 15, 20 years from now, because they serve as aspiration and vision for the future. You know, you don't have to have the exact details and initiatives under how you're going to achieve those goals, but I think they keep you looking forward and pushing the boundaries. And I mean, Nanda mentioned it earlier, but there's also an amazing quote that links that. It's the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So, you know, something simple as like solar panels or whatever, the first time they came out, they were hugely expensive. Nobody could afford them. And yet here we are, like, forced as well in South Africa and many other countries now to be using the tech. And every year it's just getting, you know, cheaper and cheaper. And so I think it's absolutely essential as a business to have that, again, discipline at least, you know, once a year. And maybe it depends on industry, but to sit down and say, like, what are the crazy futuristic things out there that are happening? Because, you know, 20 years from now, it might be a reality. And we at least need to give some thought to, you know, how might that change our industry? Or might it be something that's going to be so disruptive it could make us irrelevant? And rather disrupt yourself or at least start thinking about it than, you know, just let it happen to you. So, of course, it needs to be balanced with, you know, keeping your eye on day-to-day operations in your core business as well, but there's a balance.
Thank you, Melvi. I'm going to try and squeeze a couple more questions in, but we do have
Yes.
5 minutes, so we'll be quick. So this one is from Nitish. So he says, how solid is your strategy? And his question stems from this: as a country which has to juggle employment equity, skills retention due to, in part, to the brain drain, professionalization of the public sector, corruption, etc. South Africa has a wealth of young, capable individuals. And then the lovely compliment, he says, take this panel, for example. So our young, talented panelists. He then goes on to say, however, when you look at the leadership of organizations, both public and private sector, you find that these leadership positions are generally held by a much older generation. There seems to be no haste to facilitate the transition to bring in these young leaders like yourselves. So his question to the panel is, where do you each see areas in which small changes could be made to start this process of transitional change?
Hlonela, should we start with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me it starts at the top, because I think that the gist of the question is that, you know, the top positions are still held by, you know, the much older generation, and there's technically no room for, you know, a younger generation to hold those positions up there because they're still occupied by the older generation. I think, you know, the solution to that is really, what do we then do with that older generation if we remove them from those positions, right? So that's the first thing. We would need a solution for that, right? Because a lot of them are nearing retirement, as you mentioned. They're old, you know, whether it's in the next 5 to 10 years, but they're going to retire. But there needs to be a solid plan in place, whether it's, you know, whether it's within the particular organization, or if it's a national governmental public sector plan, right? Or public and private collaborating together, whatever the case would be. But there would need to be a plan in place. We can't just throw them out. You know, we can't just say, hey, just get out the seat and sit aside, right? Just because of their age. You know, so there needs to be a solid plan and succession right, is a common word when we talk about talent and when we talk about, you know, growth in your in your career, right, or career journey. So succession planning, right? Are the young people ready to take up those positions? Are they skilled enough? Are they exposed enough, you know, to take up those higher positions of leadership? You know, the belief could be, you know, or the perception rather could be, yes, young people are good in you know, are ready and good enough, but when it comes to the experience, because experience technically plays, you know, a very big part in performing a role successfully, right? So there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of loopholes when it comes to that. Yeah, I think I'll give an opportunity to Nanda and Melvi as well.
I don't have too much to add to that. That's not really my area of expertise, but I would say, you know, we often talk about getting to the front seat of the bus. Sometimes we just need to get off the bus and create our own pathways. I don't think, you know, yeah, there's no easy answer to this, but I think dynamic people also have to find ways to create platforms for themselves.
Yeah, I love what Nanda says, but I also think in the question is maybe an additional something that came to mind is maybe not the question of age being the challenge, but what I'm hearing in that is also there's a challenge that comes in with people being in roles long times, and that we have to be careful of the complacency that creeps in, and it's maybe less about age than how do we prevent people becoming complacent in their roles? How do we challenge them continuously? And that brings again, like, how do we manage talent, our people? How do we do our performance management systems differently? How do we give people opportunities as leadership? But then I think to Nanda's point as well, you know, some of the onus is also on you. So I do think there's, I mean, like many of our systems globally, I think could benefit from reform. I think, you know, how we generally do performance management in companies is mostly uninspirational, certainly in my experiences as well. So, you know, I think we need a lot of rethinking about that, not so much around age, but like, how do we do work? How do we do business and life that we actually get the most out of everybody? Because everybody inherently is this creative, amazing individual, but sometimes they just get stuck in places which, you know, doesn't give them the opportunity to shine. So it's a two-way street, I think. And then I have this very unpopular opinion that I might just say anyway, is that, you know, maybe forever contracts should be dead. Maybe everything should be, you know, based on terms, based on projects, and based on your performance, and for reevaluation. But, you know, that's going to scare everybody even more than the AI question is.
Thanks very much, everyone. Unfortunately, we are not only out of time, but 1 minute over time. So if we could wrap up, I think, Kevin, can we go straight to you for the thanks? But really, thank you very much to everybody.
I think it was a good question to end on.
It was an excellent question to end on. And so thank you so much to everyone for joining today's session on how solid is your strategy, really. And allow me just to say thank you to a special thanks here to our young and talented, as someone said, panel. I saw Melvi giving hearts for that young and talented. Melvi, Nanda, and Hlonela for sharing your insights on how businesses can navigate and succeed in this era of accelerated change. And to you, our ever insightful audience, your participation, your engagement, thank you for those questions. Made the session quite dynamic and informative as usual. We hope you're walking away with some valuable takeaways on building strategic resilience. One of the things that I often say about resilience is that you can only build resilience in adversity. So you have to have been through some stuff to develop that resilience. So we hope that certainly you're gathering some insights in terms of that. And we look forward to seeing you in the future as we continue hosting important conversations and discussions around organizational and regional success. And so therefore, from one of the older generation, I see you again. Until we see each other again, enjoy the rest of your week.